Have you ever watched the movie Pirates of the Caribbean? You must have. However, did you know that the Caribbean islands, Mexico, Cuba, and other Latin American countries are experiencing economic hardship? Latin America as a whole is referred to be poor. Why is this the case? Let's watch the video and find out. After 2.5 years, the COVID-19 pandemic, which has been one of the darkest tragedies the world has ever seen, is about to come to an end. Economic activity in Latin America and the Caribbean, LAC, has seen a sharp recession and robust but unequal recoveries over the century, all within the backdrop of political upheaval. Right now, the poor are being affected the most by growing inflation due to the high cost of commodities and petrol in a very ambiguous international climate. These changes are making the most vulnerable people's lives more unstable and contributing to rising levels of poverty. Before going into various reasons, let's have some background information. The economic history of Latin America. Do you think Latin America was always poor? Well, that's not the case. In fact, compared to East Asia, Latin America had a higher per capita income in the early 1960s, and just now the area is far behind. The most recent example is Argentina, which was a wealthy nation, with a per capita income that was in the top 10 richest in the world. Sadly, that performance did not continue during the 20th century. Asian countries like South Korea, Singapore, and Taiwan that had low incomes 50 years ago had advanced to become civilized economies. Although a handful of Latin American countries have higher middle incomes, no country in Latin America can be considered developed. You guys must be thinking, why is that gap? What caused Latin America to lag behind? Well, for that, continue watching the video. Protectionism. Protectionism is a significant factor in this wide disparity. Beginning in the 1950s, Latin America attempted to industrialize based on import substitutions, which is the theory that protecting your industry from the outside competition is necessary for development. This was a total failure 3 decades later, and these protected businesses did not expand. Additionally, it made Latin America far more vulnerable to the 1980s debt crisis. The lost decade, 1980. For the area, the 1980s were a dreadful decade. Because the per capita income after the decade was less, we refer to it as the lost decade. For several nations, the years 1982 to 1984 were particularly challenging. Some of them even had severe downturns for 2 or 3 years. The 1980s saw a radical transformation in Latin America's political atmosphere, with a visible tide of democracy affecting a transition in political power from military to a civilian administration. On the economic front, however, despite a variety of international initiatives to address the accumulative debt crisis that surfaced in 1982, practically all Latin American nations have racked up massive loans. They are also confronted with issues such as rapid inflation and expanding fiscal deficits. Economic instability caused societal unrest, resulting in a riot in Venezuela in February 1989. Approximately 300 people were murdered, and the imposition of martial law in Argentina in May 1989. Latin America takes some time to rebuild. After going through this experience, the area started to look outside of itself and realize how crucial it was to keep socio-economic balances, low budget deficits, low and steady inflation, and avoidance of overvalued exchange values. Humanitarian crisis. We left everything in Venezuela. We don't have a place to live or sleep and have nothing to eat, was a saying of a 34-year-old from Venezuela who fled to Brazil. Venezuelans continue to flee the nation, and there are a few signs that this trend will soon come to an end. Those who are leaving are becoming more and more helpless. Many Venezuelan migrants and refugees are trying to survive amid poverty. Venezuelans were already struggling, and the COVID-19 pandemic made matters worse by pushing them even further into poverty. Many families had taken on debt in order to live after being forced to cut back on their food consumption. They face eviction risks, exploitation dangers, and protection risks. Equal political causes. Environmental political concerns deserve special attention. Large-scale arrests of corporate leaders and several politicians followed the revelation of widespread corruption and bribery in Brazil's state-controlled oil behemoth, Petrobras, and other industries. This led to a significant economic setback and the loss of thousands of jobs for workers. The Brazilian economy was also impacted by a drop in oil prices, the 2015 layoffs at Odebrecht, and the arrest of the company's CEO. Brazil's unemployment rate is still quite high at 11.8%. And not only Brazil. Since 2001, Argentina has also experienced the negative economic effects of a government debt default. The recession has been brought on by a drop in GDP and inflation. In 2014, the MIT Billions Project reported a 40% annual inflation rate for Argentina. Looking at Venezuela, its GDP has drastically decreased along with inflation, and the country is in danger of defaulting on its international debt. Venezuelans have experienced poverty, high mortality rates, unemployment, a lack of medical services, and hunger ever since the country's 2014 economic collapse. Economic recession. In several of the Latin American nations, a parallel or illegal economy has developed as a result of widespread unemployment followed by an economic slump, stringent government rules, corruption, and other causes. These illicit enterprises avoid state laws, taxes, social security payments, market norms, and minimum wage and work hour laws, and they prosper in the shadow economy. Although some of the money made was used in the legitimate economy, these illegal enterprises cause tax evasion, decreased tax collections, higher tax rates, lower salaries and work hours, corruption, and inflation. Food insufficiency. With a prevalence of 40.9% across the board, Latin America and the Caribbean, LAC, are thought to have the second highest rates of food insecurity, FI, in the world. In the food and labor supply chains, extreme weather occurrences have joined with COVID-19 related effects, reducing food output and pushing food prices higher. In numerous LAC nations, food price inflation has therefore outpaced general inflation in both nominal and real terms. Low productivity. The region's fundamental problem is low productivity because despite periods of strong economic growth, it was unable to close the wide productivity gap with advanced nations. The performance of Asian nations is largely to blame for the recent changes in the global economy, which saw the percentage of developing economies in the global GDP overtake that of advanced nations in 2009. Steps to recovery. Here are a few initiatives Latin America might take looking at the developed economies. Regional cooperation. They ought to strengthen inter-regional cooperation. States experiencing comparable problems may exchange best practices and advice on how to create policies and assess outcomes through regional collaboration, which provides a unique forum for doing so. During the present crisis, there have been several highly significant instances of regional cooperation, like the European Union's ratification of the biggest stimulus package in its history, and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations' execution of a comprehensive recovery framework. Actions at the global level can be taken while also leveraging localized efforts. Balance. They ought to employ money, rules and guidelines, and technological collaboration in a sensible way. Partnerships have to be based on political and policy discussions that guarantee the fair application of cooperation's many mechanisms. Global policies, such as those governing corporate tax rates and nefarious financial activity, must not compromise the effectiveness of development assistance for marginalized groups. All available mechanisms should work toward attaining the SDGs, especially in light of the existing budget constraints. Final word. Future economic development would have to depend more and more on productivity increases. It is not simple to increase productivity. Thus, each country's needs must be taken into account while designing policies. Investment in infrastructure and human capital should be increased. Legal systems should be modernized, and labor and product sales should be made more effective and competitive. It would be crucial for policymakers to adjust macroeconomic policies in the near future based on an accurate evaluation of the economy's supply potential. The main task for Latin America is to build on its recent accomplishments and create the groundwork for sustainable growth by making the most of the relatively favorable external conditions. To achieve this, it is necessary to further improve fiscal situations, manage capital flows carefully to prevent financial excesses, and move forward with structural reforms to boost potential growth and productivity. That was all from our side. If you liked the video, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up. Also, subscribe to our channel so you never miss an update. Leave a comment if you still have any queries unanswered. Moreover, share this video with your fellows. Until next time.